Rolex is the most valuable watch brand on the planet, with a market value exceeding $80 billion and annual sales topping $10 billion, according to estimates from Statista and Bloomberg in 2023. Its watches are worn by presidents, celebrities, and explorers, from Winston Churchill to Roger Federer, and even on the wrist of the first man on the moon. But looking at its luxury status today, you'd never guess that Rolex was founded by a penniless orphan who lost both parents by age 12, had no formal education in watchmaking, and started the company during one of the most turbulent times in history. This is the incredible rags-to-riches story of Rolex, how a tiny workshop in London grew into a symbol of precision, prestige, and power, surviving wars, economic crashes, and endless counterfeits. But it also involves clever marketing tricks, legal battles, and controversies that question if Rolex is truly worth the hype. Let's dive in. Our story starts in 1881 in the small Bavarian town of Kulmbach, Germany, where Hans Wilsdorf was born into a working-class family. His father, Ferdinand, ran a modest ironworks shop, crafting tools and machinery, while his mother, Anna, helped manage the household. Life was simple but secure until disaster struck. In 1893, when Hans was just 12, his mother succumbed to a sudden illness, leaving the family devastated. Mere months later, his father died in a tragic factory accident, orphaning Hans and his two siblings overnight. With no parents, no inheritance, and relatives unable to support them fully, the children were split up and sent to boarding schools and distant family members. Hans, the middle child, was thrust into the harsh reality of survival. He dropped out of formal schooling, there are no records of him completing high school, and began working grueling odd jobs from farm labor to clerical work just to afford basic meals. I had to fend for myself from a very young age, Hans later reflected in his memoirs, preserved in Rolex archives. This early hardship forged his unbreakable work ethic, but it also left him with a burning ambition to create something enduring, something that time itself couldn't erode. At 15, seeking better prospects, Hans moved to La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, the epicenter of the watchmaking industry. He landed an apprenticeship at a pearl trading firm, not as a watchmaker, but as a clerk handling exports. Here, surrounded by precision Swiss movements, he self-taught the basics of horology by dismantling and reassembling watches in his spare time. No mentors, no classes, just raw curiosity. But Switzerland's high costs and limited opportunities pushed him further. In 1900, at 19, Hans arrived in London with barely enough money for a week's rent, speaking broken English and sleeping in dingy hostels. He took a low-paying job as a translator at Kuno Korten, a watch importer, earning pennies while absorbing every detail of the trade. Nights were spent experimenting with watch parts under dim gas lamps. Hans dreamed big. He saw the potential in wristwatches, which were dismissed as novelties back then. Pocket watches ruled, but Hans believed wrists could be the future, especially for active men in sports, military, and exploration. The stage was set for his revolution, but it would take a bold leap. In 1905, Hans partnered with his English brother-in-law, Alfred Davis, to found Wilsdorf and Davis in a tiny Hatton Garden office in London. With no employees and limited capital, they imported Swiss watch movements and assembled them into cases. The breakthrough came in 1908 when Hans invented the brand name Rolex. He tested hundreds of combinations, seeking something short, elegant, and pronounceable worldwide. "I wanted a word that sounded like the winding of a watch," he explained in a 1940s interview archived by the Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry. Rolex had no meaning, a blank slate for building a legend. Their early focus was precision. In 1910, a Rolex became the first wristwatch to earn the Swiss Chronometric Precision Certificate from the official watch rating center in Bienne, proving it could rival pocket watches in accuracy. This silenced skeptics who called wristwatches unmanly or unreliable. Sales trickled in, but World War I in 1914 changed everything. Britain imposed heavy duties on luxury imports, and as a German national, Hans faced suspicion and potential internment. Resourcefully, he supplied Rolex watches to British soldiers, who praised their durability in trenches. To escape escalating taxes and risks, He moved the company to neutral Switzerland in 1915, setting up initially in Vienna before fully relocating to Geneva by 1920. Renamed Montreux's Rolex SA, the firm innovated relentlessly. The pinnacle? The 1926 Rolex Oyster, the world's first waterproof wristwatch. Its patented screw-down crown and hermetically sealed case, inspired by oyster shells, could resist water, dust, and shocks. To prove it, Hans orchestrated a genius marketing stunt. In 1927, swimmer Mercedes Gleitze wore an oyster while crossing the English Channel. After 10 hours in frigid waters, the watch ticked perfectly. Hans splashed this across newspaper front pages, buying ads that read, "The wonder watch that defies the elements." Overnight, Rolex became synonymous with adventure, but greater tests loomed. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, slashing luxury sales. Hans countered by launching affordable sub-brands like Tudor, still owned by Rolex today. Then came World War II in 1939. Switzerland stayed neutral, but bombings disrupted supplies and Rolex's British market evaporated. Hans, ever the humanitarian, sent free watches to Allied POWs via the Red Cross, over 3,000 per company records. Hans died childless in 1960 at 79, but his foresight shone. In 1945, he'd established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, making Rolex a private, non-profit entity owned by a charitable trust. This unique structure, detailed in Swiss corporate archives, ensures profits fund philanthropy, not shareholders. Over $100 million donated annually to arts, science, and education. No family heirs meant no takeovers, keeping Rolex independent. Post-Hans, innovations exploded. The 1954 Submariner, building on 1953 prototypes and tests, was the first watch waterproof to 100 meters, tested by divers like Jacques Cousteau. That same year, Sir Edmund Hillary summited Everest wearing a Rolex Oyster Perpetual. He sent it back to Geneva with a note, "It never stopped." In 1955, the GMT Master allowed pilots to track multiple time zones, developed with Pan Am Airlines. The 1963 Daytona, named after the racetrack, became a racing icon, worn by Paul Newman. His sold for $17.8 million in 2017 per Phillips auction records. But the 1970s quartz crisis nearly killed Swiss watchmaking. Cheap, battery-powered Japanese watches flooded the market, accurate to seconds per year versus mechanical's minutes. Rolex refused to pivot, betting on tradition. It paid off. By the 1980s, mechanical watches rebounded as status symbols. Under CEOs like Andre Heiniger, Hans's successor, and Patrick Heiniger, Rolex expanded to over 100 countries, producing 1 million plus watches yearly in ultra-secure Geneva factories. Today, Rolex is an $80 billion plus behemoth, but not without shadows. Critics accuse it of artificial scarcity, producing limited quantities to create years-long wait lists, inflating resale prices. Example, a $10,000 Daytona resells for $30,000 on Chrono 24. A 2022 lawsuit in California alleged antitrust violations, claiming Rolex controls 25% of the luxury watch market, according to Statista. Counterfeiting costs billions. Rolex sues aggressively, winning against eBay in 2008 for hosting fakes. Environmentally, gold sourcing has drawn fire, though Rolex now uses 100% recycled precious metals, 2023 sustainability report. And that foundation, it minimizes taxes, sparking debates on transparency, yet it funds global charities, like COVID relief in 2020. From an orphan struggle to a timeless empire, Rolex embodies precision and perseverance. Hans Wilsdorf once said, "We want to be the first in the field and Rolex to be the first." Mission accomplished. But what do you think? Is Rolex worth the hype or just clever marketing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button if you learned something, and subscribe for more deep dives into luxury legends. I'll see you there. Cheers.